Hey everybody, Brian here. I thought I was done making these step-by-step videos on my Logic to Anything script, but I just purchased the BFD3, and I have to say there's so many nuances and oddities with this plugin that I decided to make yet another video so you can see exactly what you need to do to get, say, Logic and BFD3 mapped in the most accurate way possible. So let's go. Now, the first thing I want to show you is exactly why it's so important to do drum mapping the way I'm advocating. Let's say we just use the caveman approach.
I'm just a caveman.
And used BFD3's built-in Logic map. So here I have an instance of BFD3 and I loaded up the Logic Pro drummer. You can do that in its MIDI map chooser. So there it is, Logic Pro X drummer. And now what I have here is just a Logic drummer part. And to make it really clear what's going on, at least in the beginning, I muted the kick and snare. So I really want you to focus on the hi-hat. And now let's see what happens using my Logic to Anything script.
Decided to make you a special project of mine
that I've already set up, and then later in this video I'm going to show you all those steps. Playing back the same exact Logic drummer part. Now I hope you notice the radical difference. The first example is actually pretty atrocious. I mean, this is supposed to be a hi-hat part, right? But the hi-hat isn't grooving, there's no opening and closing, and that's what the script corrects, among other things. So hopefully you already see the power here and the motivation to continue with this video. This isn't a YouTube short, but if you want to do drum mapping in the most advanced way currently possible in 2025, then continue watching this video. So first let's configure BFD3. There's some nuances here. So here we go, I'm opening it up. I'm going to click on this kits tab here, and I'm just going to choose some kit. There's no default kit here as far as I know. So I'm just going to choose this hard rock kit. Hard Rock JM. And now you'll notice there are certain cymbals loaded, toms, hi-hat, snare, kick. And what I want to do is, just so I can show you some of the functionality of the script, I want to add a couple additional cymbals. So let's say we want to have 2 crash cymbals on the left, which are already loaded. But say we also want to load an additional cymbal on the right side so that we can have something analogous to Logic's crash left and crash right. So I'm going to click on this unused slot. And now I'm going to click on drums, and I'm just going to find some crash. Here we go, Boss First Crash 18 stick, and I'm going to drag that over here. And notice in the mixer, this now shows up as cymbal 4. So it's important to make a note of that because we're going to use this naming convention later in our mapping. So cymbal 4 is right crash. And if we click on this one, we see that's showing up as crash 1. So crash 1 will be one of our left-ish crashes. And then this one here, that's showing up as cymbal 1. So I'll make a note of that. Cymbal 1, also left-ish. And here we have the ride. That's pretty self-explanatory. That's a cowbell, that's not a crash. I'll talk about that a little later. And then down here we have the hi-hat showing up as hi-hat. That's also obvious. As well as 3 toms. Showing up down here is high tom, mid tom, and floor tom. And now what I want to do is I want to add, say, a china and a splash cymbal. So I'm going to click on this unused slot here. And I'm going to add, say, this china 20 stick. So I'm going to drag that over. And I'm going to click on it and make note of what it's showing up in the mixer. So that's cymbal 2, which is our china. Then likewise with a splash, I'm going to look in this articulation list, find a splash. Here we go, the splash 10 stick, but you could choose whatever kind you want. I'm going to drag that over, and I'm going to click on that. Now see, that's appearing as cymbal 3 in the mixer. And now let's get back to this cowbell, because some of you probably want more cowbell.
I could have used a little more cowbell.
So I'm clicking that. So that's percussion. Now Logic, there's a tambourine, a shaker, I think hand claps. So those are some pretty useful articulations to add. So let's just add them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to right click in this space anywhere. And I'm going to hit add percussion. I'm not going to worry about the geometrical layout of these hits. You can always adjust that kind of stuff later. I just want to load something in here. So I'm going to look for, say, a tambourine. There we go. And I'm going to drag that over to that empty slot. And now I click on it and I see that's percussion 2. And let's add another percussion element. So add percussion. And there's another unused slot. This time, let's say a shaker kind of sound. So a cabasa. That's percussion 3. And another percussion element. Add percussion. And let's look for a hand clap. There it is. Drag it over. Click on it. That's percussion 4. Before we set up a mapping in our script, we have to make sure that BFD3 has its own internal keyboard layout set with all the notes we need. So let's click on this key map tab. And remember, we already have the cowbell in the kit. If you click on that, we see that that was B4. That's its hit articulation. We can see if there are any other available articulations by right-clicking. And then if you look under unload articulation, you'll see there's also an alternative hit. But in this jumble of notes here, there's no obvious spot to add that. So you can just go to the bottom for now. Later on, you could customize this however you want. The important thing is to make sure that all notes are on this keyboard layout somewhere. So I'm going to choose C-2. Here, I'm going to click on alternative. Selected note C-2, nothing's assigned now, but we hit assign. And now this cowbell alternative hit is down there in C-2. And then let's click on tambourine, do the same thing. Right click to see the articulations. Under unload articulation, we see there are 5. So we have a hit. It's already loaded to B5. We didn't do anything special there. BFD3 scored that away. But let's say we want to add these others. So let's click on alternative. We'll have that one start at D-2. Hit assign. And then click D#-2. Let's add the drag. So click drag. There it is. Assign. And there's also a flam available. So now let's choose E-2. Click flam. Assign. And then F-2. There's also a side stick articulation. And hit assign. So now we have all our available tambourine hits. Now let's move on to the shaker. See what's available. There's an alternative. So neither the hit nor the alternative are loaded. So let's choose G-2. That'll be the hit. So here we have the cabasa. The hit is selected. Now assign. And I'm going to choose G#-2. And this time we're going to choose alternative. Assign. That takes care of the cabasa. And then we have the hand claps. I right click there. On articulation, I just see there's a hit. So here under the human group claps, I'm going to choose hit. Actually, make sure you choose the key. So A#-2. That's going to be the clap hit. Assign. Remember, we added this cymbal hit, which is showing up in the mixer as cymbal 4. But notice it doesn't have any of its notes actually assigned to the keyboard in BFD3. So what we can do is we can look for unused notes. And so crash 2 is currently not used for anything. Right? If I click on this, there's no sound output. Any of these crash 2 hits are just empty for now. So what we can do is just use these already existing entries for this additional cymbal hit that we added. So it has the same articulations that a typical cymbal has: bell, edge, and bow. So here's the crash 2 edge. So you choose that. And with this cymbal 4 chosen. Now I know this is kind of confusing. In the mapping, it's called crash 2. In the mixer, this is called cymbal 4. So there's some mental bookkeeping to do. So just make notes somewhere. This is the edge. So I'm going to click edge, assign. And that's now this one. Let's look for another crash 2. Here's bow. So here I'm going to choose bow, assign. So that's not populated. And what else do we have for crash 2? There's the bell. So I'm clicking that. And I'm going to click here, bell, assign. There's also a hit, which I think is the same thing as the edge. So I'm going to click on hit, assign. And there's also a crash 2 choke. And even though we don't see that in this articulation list, cymbals do have these choke notes. So I'm going to choose that, choke, assign. And now we're good to go for all these crash 2 entries. You can do one last sanity check. Make sure you absolutely have everything, all articulations assigned to some keynote here. And I think we're good to go. Except with BFD3, it has these so-called variable articulations for snare, and that's where you can use CC control for snare position. So that based on the CC value, it'll trigger either a center or an edge sample. So it's a good idea to map this because the script can take advantage of that. Let's just find some available note. I'll use this B-1 assign, and I'll take note that this particular note has 64 as its cutoff. So 0 to 64 is a regular hit, and then 65 to 127 is going to be this half center edge kind of hit. And make a mental note that that's MIDI CC number 16. BFD3 can also react to foot control, and so click on one of these hi-hat notes that's used for foot control. So that's this F sharp -1, this G sharp -1, this A sharp -1. So if you click on any one of these, and then here on the right, you're going to see this hi-hat tab, and you see these default levels. It's control number 4. You can write down these levels somewhere. We're going to use those in a moment. Everything else you can keep as is. And one other nuance here in BFD3, that's about cymbal choking. So in the key map tab, if you click on tools, just make sure that this is checked off, choke on aftertouch. BFD3 uses poly aftertouch for cymbal choking, so you want that checked off. Now with the BFD3 set, by the way, we're going to open up this script, Logic Drums to BFD3. So here I am with this scripter instance as a MIDI effect. I'm hitting Open Script in Editor, and that brings it up. And the first thing we want to do is set up CC related data. In my user guide, I have a lot of super useful information on various kits, including information on what Logic does in terms of hi-hat control. This would be a super long video if I went into detail on the nuances of Logic and hi-hat control. But at the beginning of the video, you saw how awful third-party libraries handle Logic hi-hats. And it took a lot of reverse engineering to figure out what needs to be done to get Logic hi-hats to map absolutely correctly. So in Logic, sometimes you see these articulation IDs being spit out by drummer in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. Sometimes you might just use these articulation IDs 1 through 7. In the bottom line, Logic is using 7 levels, and it uses these CC ranges. And regardless if it uses these weird drummer outputted AIDs, in the end, when Logic plays something back via a sampler, it's performing an internal kind of mapping where depending on the drummer note in the AID, what gets played back might be some other note with these AIDs from 1 to 7. So just trust me, that's how it works, and the script handles all of that magic for you. So what we're seeing here, these are precisely the same values you're seeing here. So this is CC ranges source. This tells us what the source library has, and this 4 means the CC number 4. This is the hi-hat control. So with 7 levels specified in the source, we then want to move on to the CC ranges target. I'm back in the user guide, this time under the appendix that deals with BFD3. So we want to look at the hi-hat data. And BFD3 uses 9 levels. Here they are. Also this comments block here specifies those 9 levels as well. And then what you want to do here is to map 7 to 7. So Logic has 7 levels, BFD3 has 9. So let's make sure Logic's 1 maps up to a 1 in the target, 2 maps up to a 2, etc. That means we're taking BFD3's 9 levels and breaking them down to 7, which allows this very easy translation from a source to a target. And the way we do that is, for some of these levels, we just specify them as they are. So the full closed level stays the same with full open, as well as a couple of these other levels. And then for some of the intermediate levels, I just have it set up so that a BFD3 quarter open or 3/8 open, those are going to be the level 3 that we're using for this baseline mapping. And then level 4 could be BFD3 5/8 or 1/2 open. I know that might sound confusing at first, but after a while you'll see that this makes sense, and it's what's needed to make this easy translation from CC data from a source to a target. And now also BFD3 has snare position control. It uses CC number 16, and that's so that it can switch based on CC data from its center hit to its half edge hit. From 0 to 64, that's where we have the regular center hits, and then from 65 to 127, that's where the half edge hits come in. So that's all we need to specify here. Now that we have the CC data out of the way, we move on to the source articulation list, this variable L. So the source is Logic, and here are all of Logic's hits. We can view them if you open up a track with Logic Drummer on it. and then create some MIDI part. Here I have drum kit loaded. Here's a MIDI part. And then you just zoom here until you start seeing the note names. All of those note names there are exactly what I've specified here. Kick, snare hits, hi-hats, toms, ride, cymbals, and then the percussion hits. There's 31 or 32 hits there. And then the script also gives you the ability to manage user-defined notes. So Logic doesn't have snare, flam, ruff, and roll, but we can create those notes and generate those kind of sounds in target libraries, either if they have those kind of articulations themselves, or if not, we can use some magic to generate those sounds. You'll see that later. And Logic doesn't have a ride choke, for instance, doesn't have a China crash or choke, splash crash or choke, but we can add those kind of notes and then trigger those kind of sounds in a target library that has those articulations. And you can specify additional articulations, however many you want, and miscellaneous other user notes. So that's a pretty useful feature. With these user-defined notes, if you know there are already certain keys that are unused, you can just specify them here. That's why I have this A-1, H-1, etc. I know those notes are available, but you could also just keep these blank, just have blank strings like so, so on for the rest of them. Then the script will automatically assign unused notes. But I decided to use certain notes that were unused, so that's that. And by the way, with these notes, you can also specify note numbers. For instance, C1, I think that's 24, right? So you can just write in 24. So there's some flexibility in how you enter this information. And that's really all I have to say about that. Pretty easy to set up the Logic side. Now for the really fun part of adding all the notes in the target library. So this is the target articulation list T, and the target here is BFD3. So I'm going to open BFD3, and we've already gone through the process making sure all the kit pieces and their articulations have a corresponding note. And one thing I forgot to mention for hi-hats, if you click on the hi-hat and then look in the articulation list, you're going to see these exclamation points. Most kits aren't going to have these additional levels, these 7/8 and 1/8, 5/8, etc., 3/8. I guess you need an expansion kit or something, but it's not a big deal. All 9 levels will still play back. It's just that BFD3 will use existing levels. It'll use the levels that it contains and just double them up so that the full range of CC values will trigger whatever levels are available in your kit. So ultimately what we have in this kit are 5 levels, not 9, but not a big deal. And then regarding snare, I thought there was a flam note with this kit, but there's not. That's what that exclamation point means. I didn't notice that earlier. Not a big deal. We can generate a flam, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. So basically what I've done is I've taken every single note that I'm aware of in this kit, and I've written them out here. So the kick notes, the various snare articulations, including the position control note that I've labeled snare CC here, all the HH notes that are in that particular kit. We don't have everything that's possible here. I'd have to use some expansion set like Dark Farm. All the toms as well, each tom with its 3 articulations. BFD3 also specifies a float tom 2, a mid tom 2, and a high tom 2. But in this kit, those are not loaded, and I've indicated as such, as well as all the crash hits, the ones that are loaded by default in this particular kit that we're using, as well as some of the ones that I manually entered, just so we can have a China and a splash. We also added a crash in that Cymbal 4 slot, and we have the ride. And lastly, those percussion pieces that I added and all their articulations. So quite a number of articulations. So we're going from Logic's 31 or 32 to what looks like over 100 in BFD3. Well, maybe not quite, but quite a few. And lastly, we're going to move on to the actual mapping. This is where all the magic happens. So in Get Good Drums, you have these kick no snare hits. Logic has a kick 1 and kick 2. So I simply did a 1-to-1 mapping, the most simple kind of mapping possible. In Logic snare edge, that logically maps up to the snare half edge in BDF3. In Logic snare center, maps up to the snare hit in BDF3. Now remember, BDF3 can use snare position control. And so another way to map these, and I'll uncomment this so it's more visible. You could take this approach where snare edge is going to map to the snare CC note. It's going to be assigned a level of 2. And then the way this works is the script will look at the CC ranger's target. CC number is 16, level 2. It'll generate a CC value between 65 and 127, which corresponds to the half edge hit. And then similar with the regular hit, which would be assigned level 1, and that'll generate the right kind of CC data for BFD3 to then play back a center hit. So that's why we have AID assigned 1 for the center, AID assigned 2 for the edge. And Logic has a snare rim shot edge. These will both map up to the snare rim in BFD3. And that rim click that's in BFD3, that matches pretty well with Logic's snare stick. And then Logic's snare side stick is a good match to snare side stick in BFD3. And now moving on to some of the MIDI trickery that we can use to play back certain types of snare hits, though you can actually use these parameters for any kind of note. So with snare flam, in the kit that I'm using, I saw that exclamation point in the articulation list, so a snare flam hit in BFD3 is not going to actually produce a flam. It's going to be the basic snare center hit. So what we do then is we have an entry like so. This is one of the user-defined notes that we added. Remember, we have those user-defined notes here. They're not contained in Logic, but we invented them. Flam, ruff, roll, as well as a bunch of cymbal-related notes. So this mapping says, take that Logic snare flam user note that we defined, map that to either a snare hit or a snare half edge in BDF3, and use this parameter flam, etc. to artificially generate a flam kind of sound in BDF3. And then likewise with the ruff, and then with that snare roll, the snare drag is sort of like a roll, but it's just momentary. You can't extend out a note and have the roll be the duration of that note using the snare drag articulation. But if you wanted to, you could take this approach instead, where we would artificially generate a roll kind of sound, analogously to how we're doing with the flam and ruff. Now onto the hi-hat. So Logic has these tip, shank, and edge articulations. And remember what I mentioned earlier about all the craziness that's going on internally in Logic for it to handle its open and closed hi-hat levels. So don't worry too much about this if it's hurting your brain to look at what's happening here. This just ensures that what I talked about earlier with Logic and its AIDs, how some of its notes and AIDs get remapped back to other notes and AIDs 1 through 7. This takes care of all of that. So Logic's tip, that'll match up with the tip CC trigger in BDF3, the shank matches up to the shank. I'm including the bell as well. If a kit has these bell articulations, then either a shank kind of sound or a bell kind of sound will be generated. Logic doesn't have a bell, so this is just a way to get a bell sound from BDF3 in the game, triggered from Logic. And then Logic's edge, there's no edge articulation in BDF3 for the hi-hats, so I just chose the shank to be what gets triggered from Logic's edge. Let me give you a breakdown on how this all works, this hi-hat opening and closing. So there are 3 cases basically. Case 1, say you don't have any articulation IDs, all you have is CC control data in the source MIDI, and so that'll be for CC number 4. So in those cases, say there was a Logic HH tip and there was CC data with a value of say 55, then the script is simply going to see that a value of 55 corresponds to level 4. And then in the CC ranges target variable, here are the values of level 4, and so a value of 52 to 76 will be sent onward to BFD3. So that's how that situation works. And now let's say instead we're using articulation IDs that are being outputted from Drummer. So it outputs these IDs in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. So let's say there's an HH edge and it had an AID of 21. Well, what's really going to happen is Logic actually treats that as an HH shank when there's an AID of 21, and it's going to be reassigned an AID of 5. So HH edge with AID of 21 really becomes HH shank with an AID of 5. So here's the shank. And so in that case, the target node will be sent. So either this shank controller or the bell controller in BFD3. And because the AID of 5 was assigned, it then goes back to the CC range's target, looks at the level 5, and will send a value between 39 and 51 to BFD3. And then the other case is you're not using these weird drummer outputted AIDs. Instead, you just have those typical IDs of 1 through 7 that sampler is using internally. In that case, it's similar. It's just skipping the step of using this AID map. And so if the Logic node is an HH tip and the AID is, say, 4, well, then the script looks at CC range's target, level 4, and will send a value between 52 and 76 for that CC number 4. So that's the mechanism behind why the Logic hi-hats will work exactly as they should in a target library. And then Logic's foot close, that gets mapped to the pedal articulation in BDF3, and the foot splash from Logic maps up to the HH splash articulation. Now with toms, depending on the kit, you might have 3, 4, 2. So in the kit I chose, there were 3 toms. Logic has 3 toms, so it's pretty straightforward, one-to-one kind of mapping. But BDF3 has additional articulations. It has a typical center kind of hit, but it also has rim and rim click hits. So in that kind of situation where a source library has, say, 1 articulation and a target has 3, the script has all sorts of ways to deal with that. One way is to just use a one-to-many mapping, where Logic's tom low 1 will trigger either a regular hit, a rim hit, or a click hit. In this case, I'm using a likelihood of occurrence. So this :2 means this regular hit will be chosen 2 times more often as would a rim. That ensures that these weird sounding rim clicks aren't happening as often as the other ones. Or you could use this approach where you're using articulation switching. So the tom low 1 will trigger either a regular hit or a rim hit, but if you give it an AID of 3, then it's going to trigger that rim click kind of sound. And likewise with these other mappings. So Logic's tom low 2, I'm having be the same as its low 1. So this mapping is the same as this. And likewise with the other tom hits. And there's another possibility as well. You could use this velocity switch. So in this case, it says if we have a tom low 1 hit and its velocity is between 105 and 114, then playback in BFD3, this floor tom rim hit. And if the velocity is between 115 and 127, then play the rim click hit. Otherwise, just play the default target note, which is the regular floor tom 1 hit. So there, we talked about 3 ways to handle these kinds of 1 articulation in the source library and how to get that to play back multiple articulations in the target. Now with choking, BFD3 uses poly aftertouch. It has these choke notes as well. So here are the basic ride hits, going from Logic to BDF3, pretty straightforward. And then the choke, we're mapping that Logic ride choke that we invented to the actual ride choke in BDF3, and this choke's parameter says, okay, here's the list of source notes that choke, and this :PT says use the poly aftertouch method, and during the testing part of this video we'll talk more about that. And then Logic has a left crash and a right crash, as well as its what it calls stop hits. I've just renamed those Cymbal left choke, so Logic doesn't call it this way, but this is how I'm naming it. And so Logic's left crash I'm mapping to the Cymbal 1 and crash 1 in BDF3 because these are oriented kind of in the leftish field. And then similar to above, I'm using an AID switch. In this case, we have these bell articulations, which sound quite a bit different than the other articulations. So this way, a Logic crash left will play back one of these types of hits. Again, using these likelihood of occurrence ways so that the regular hits are played 2 times more often than others. Then you could assign AID3 to any notes you want to in your MIDI, and that'd get the bell articulations playing. And the choking here works the same way I just described with the ride. Here we're specifying 2 choke notes, because remember here we're specifying 2 types of hits, Cymbal 1 or crash 1, and the script will figure this out automatically. It'll know which kind of choke to play depending on which kind of crash was played prior. And again, we're specifying poly aftertouch, so chokes is Cymbal left crash. And likewise with the right crash, in this particular kit I loaded an extra cymbal just so I could have a logical mapping to a right crash from Logic. And analogous with the AID switch to get the bell articulation in the game. And then same deal with the choking. Choke, cymbal, right crash. And then Logic doesn't have China or splash articulations, but remember we invented some notes. So this made up Logic China crash note can trigger in BDF3 or an actual China hit, which is loaded in the Cymbal 2. That's how I set it up anyway. And likewise, it has a choke note, Cymbal 2 choke. It's going to be poly aftertouch. This note chokes this one, and likewise with splash. So obviously you'd have to pay attention here. If you didn't load these kind of hits in your kit, then it wouldn't make sense to do this kind of mapping. I'm showing you here just so you can understand how to use that functionality of making up some note and then using it to trigger articulations in a target library. And then we have those percussion hits, Logic shaker mapping to either the cabasa hit or the alternative hit. And then the tambourine is mapping to either the regular hit or its alternative. but you could also assign AIDs 1, 2, or 3 in your MIDI editing, which would be a way to get the drag, flam, and side stick hits playing in BFD3. Hand clap, straightforward, just a 1-to-1, and the cowbell, similar to what we're doing with the shaker. It's a one hit in Logic, can map to 1 of 2 here in BFD3, cowbell, regular hit, or the cowbell alternative. And then these entries here, those are just for the automatic hi-hat pedal close splash detection. Here you specify the pedal close note in the splash, and these are exactly what we specified earlier up here for the target, close, and splash notes. And in the testing, I'll talk more about that kind of detection. So that's the mapping. All sorts of nuance, a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of intricacies regarding hi-hats, but this is the same for all of the example scripts I have. You don't have to worry about this. Any logic to some kind of library is going to work using this setup. And all we did was specify the target notes in BFD3. With all that setup out of the way, you can hit run script to validate that everything's okay. The script does a ludicrous amount of checking to make sure you didn't make any errors. So let's say we had some kind of error in a note name, we added a non-allowed note, or we had some kind of error down here in some note, or we had some kind of error down here in the mapping, etc., etc. No matter what kind of error you make, it's going to get picked up. So I'm going to hit run script, and notice the GUI gives us some visual indication that something's not right. You see some basic information here, but the details are going to be down in this console output. So a syntax error with that right edge hit in the source articulation list, so you know exactly what to fix. There's also an error in the target list. They add an extra letter in this name, and so when we do the mapping, that's going to fail because it's not finding that in the target list. So we correct that, and then we hit run script again. And we're also told that the right edge in the mapping is an error because there's no right edge in the source articulation list. So sometimes errors can trickle down and cause other errors, but because we fixed this one, that's going to correct that one as well. So we hit run script, and now we see the show advanced stuff option up here. That's always an indicator that all is well, and the error indicator here disappeared. And we see here successfully validated source to target mapping. That means we're good to go. There might be warnings. You'll see some basic info here, and again, details here. And those warnings here, they're not showstoppers. They're just saying that, hey, you have some articulations in Logic that aren't being used. In this case, it's those user-defined notes we invented. And then in the target list, we're told, hey, you're not using these, which is not a big deal. And especially these hi-hat related notes, we're told they're not mapped to, but actually they are in kind of an indirect way because of this action here, where these Logic notes are using the CC trigger notes in BFD3, and CC data is being fed over to BFD3 so that it knows internally what note to play based on the CC values it's receiving. So you can ignore that, those really are used. And then we're told about these other articulations that aren't being used. And remember, we just happen to have some pieces that aren't used, the floor tom 2, cymbal 3, etc. So now let's test it out. First, we'll test all as well with the hi-hats. So first, we're going to test the case where you have CC data. So you can think of this as CC data translation. This raw CC data is going to get translated to BFD3 based on what we did up here earlier with these CC ranges, source, and target variables, which acts like a translation table going from Logic 7 levels to 7 in BFD3. So I'll hit play. And we see the output, for instance, CC value of 24 corresponds to level 2 in target library. This is all based on the lookup that's going on here. So a value of 24 in Logic, which is in level 2, was getting mapped to 112 in BFD3. As 112 falls in that range of level 2, being played back in BFD3 via this HH tip CC. And likewise for the other notes. So that's working correctly. And then we can do the same thing for Logic's shank and edge, and we'll see a similar result where all is working to plan. And then this particular kit doesn't have a bell articulation, so this is probably going to play back as a regular tip or shank articulation. And then the other way we can have hi-hats opening and closing, that's when we use articulation IDs 1 through 7. So here I've just manually assigned these AIDs 1 through 7. Notice there's no CC data, but CC data will be sent to BFD3 because a given AID represents some given level. So an AID 1 is going to trigger CC values that correspond to the level 1 that we defined for BDF3, and likewise with the other AIDs. So that's all correct. And again, we see the relevant output. And that's what we're seeing here with entries such as for AD5, sending CC4 value 50. So AD5, that's this one, which in the target in BDF3 corresponds to CC values between 39 and 51. So all is well here, and I won't test the other logic articulations, the G#1 and the A#1. All is working just fine. And then the other way, you have hi-hat control, and this is probably the way that it's going to happen most often, is if you're using DrumMicA. DrumMicA is outputting its hi-hat notes in this weird way, basically using F#1 and A#1 with its AIDs in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. So that's what we're seeing here, AIDs in the 10s. So we play this back. So we know all is well with hi-hats, and let's also talk about the snare. So we have snare position control, as well as just individual snare hits for the center and that half edge. So first we'll play this back, and it's just going to use these basic mappings. These are the center hits, these are the half edge hits. And so we see that here in the output, where first we have the snare center hits, then the snare edge hits. And now to confirm that the CC position control is working in BDF3 or BFD3. I think this whole video I've been calling it BDF. So now we play back. And in this case we see that this snare CC is being used with CC values being sent, which correspond to either a regular kind of snare hit, which remember those are the values, the CC values from 0 to 64. And then beyond 64, that's when we were getting output that corresponds to a half edge sound, and that's what we're seeing here. And we can also test these flam, ruff, and roll articulations. First the flam, so that's 2 quick hits. The ruff, similar, just 3 hits. And then the roll, which is a very momentary roll. BFD3 calls it a drag. And by the way, if you want to have a roll that acts more like a roll, where the length of the note will be the duration of the roll, then we can use this approach. Here's how that would sound. And by the way, we can control some aspect of this playback under Show Advanced Stuff. For instance, we could make the roll timing, roll velocity have a lot of variation, and lower the speed, or we could increase the speed. Then you can increase or decrease the speed of the flam and ruff as well using this control. So now let's move on to HH pedal detection. That's also controlled by this GUI. So I just drew in some arbitrary CC data, and first one thing you want to check is go into BFD3 and then click on one of those variable articulations. Make sure you have auto pedal event and auto splash event turned off, because otherwise BFD3 would also be performing that kind of detection, and we're going to hear that in a second. But first, let's see how the script handles it. So we go under HH pedal settings. We're going to choose both because we want to detect both the chick and the splash, but you could do them individually if you wanted to. And now here we see those target notes that are going to be played back, and we can control the sensitivity. Here we want this to correspond to the data. This is channel 1, CC number 4. So I hit play. And we see some output here where a splash was being detected, or a chick, information on their durations, and some other information outputted as well. And so this works by looking at quick transitions from an open to a closed state or a closed to an open. If we wanted to have less detections, we could turn the sensitivities way down, like that back. And so there are less detections going on there. If we turn the sensitivity way up, then every imaginable movement here is probably going to trigger. So having it in the middle probably makes sense. And by the way, you can always click on up here, reset to defaults, and that'll get things back to where they were. And now let's see how BFD3 performs when doing that kind of detection. So now click on auto pedal event and auto splash event. Close out of here, and now hit play. And I'm not hearing any splashes. Or maybe they're super faint. I'm not sure if that's a glitch in BFD3, but I actually prefer the way my script handles it, and the script gives you a lot more flexibility and fine tuning. So that's how that works. And now we're going to look at one of these tom mappings just so you can see what's going on here. So remember, one way to deal with one articulation in Logic mapping to several in a target is to use a one to several mapping. That's what this is. The Logic Low 1 will trigger either a floor tom 1 regular hit, rim hit, or rim click. So play back these 4 here. But first we have to comment these out. So I'll hit play. And if I hit play enough, you'll hear these various articulations being chosen at random. And the rim click is chosen less often, which is why we're hearing it much less often. And now you'll see the AID switch in effect. So these 4 notes, I've assigned AIDs to these last 2. So the first 2 have no AID assigned, these last 2 have AID 3. And remember, AID 3 means play back a rim click sound, otherwise play back either a floor tom 1 regular hit or a rim. So we see that's working as it should. And then if you wanted to use velocity switching instead, in this case, velocities less than 105, those are going to play back a regular tom hit. And then from 105 to 114, it's going to play back a rim. And then anything from 115 onwards is going to be a click. So you can see the velocity switching in effect there, and you see some information in the output to that effect. Now another test we can do is ride choking. So here's a ride hit in Logic, plain old ride edge kind of sound. And here's the choke note. Remember, this is our invented ride choke note, that's C-1. And in the GUI, you can also see some information on our user-defined notes. So user cymbal notes, we click there. And we see ride choke is at C-1. Likewise, I forgot to mention, you can see the user snare notes as well. And you could change these in the GUI. You just have to make sure to choose a note that's available. So if I tried to make the snare flam at B-1, we're going to be told that's a no-go because B-1 is already used by the snare roll. So that's how that works. You can change things here and not have to hit run script again. The changes will be immediate. Back to this ride hit being choked. So you heard the choking. And remember what I said earlier about how BFD3 uses poly aftertouch? And in this case, the duration of the choke is the duration of the source choke note. So if we elongated this, that choke will drag out. So you can hear that. And you can also choose target choke note, in which case this is telling BFD3 to actually play that choke note, whereas before the script is actually sending BFD3 poly aftertouch data. Try this method. Now notice it's a very quick choke, and that's irrespective of this duration. So that's why I prefer using poly aftertouch. Most libraries that support poly aftertouch, they also support having the choke duration depending on the length of the input choke. And we can do something similar with our made-up China note in Logic. We have this China crash as E-1, the choke is F-1, and that's what we're testing here. So that works fine. And then we can also look at that tambourine, which has all sorts of articulations. So what I have here, those are the tambourine hits. The first 4 do not have an AID assigned, an articulation ID. And then the last 3, I assigned AIDs 1, 2, and 3 respectively, which is going to result in these additional articulations being triggered, the drag, the flam, and the side stick. See that? Articulation switch for 1, 2, and 3. That's how that works. So we'll play back. So the first 4, those are either tambourine hit or it's alternate. And then we heard the drag, the flam, and the side stick. Here's the drag, the flam, and the side stick. So that's it. We just validated that all is working well. And I didn't test every single articulation here because this video is already getting long, right? But you get the point. It's important once you've done a mapping to do a pretty thorough validation. Once you're confident everything is working well, just uncheck this show console output. And if show extra debug info is checked off, you could uncheck that. And now if you play something back, you're not going to have any output here in the console. Because the console output, that draws CPU resources away from Logic, which you don't want to do if you can avoid it. But it's good to have that kind of output when you're first setting up the script and doing this kind of testing and validation. So now with this done, we can close out of here. I'm going to return some of these settings to how they were. So we won't use snare CC control, and we'll get that tom 1 back to how it was, just using this one to several mapping. And that's it. So run script. And now what we could do is say you have some Logic drummer part. You have this funk rock part. And remember earlier, I showed you how awful that plays back when we don't do this kind of advanced mapping. If we just let these libraries do their own thing, where they're telling you there's a Logic drummer map, but it actually works really atrociously. So now we can play back with the confidence that things like hi-hats are going to translate really well. So that was that. I hope you appreciate the power of the script, the way it works, the universal language to map any library to any other library. And even though we used Logic as an example here, you could map SuperiorDrummer to BFD3 or vice versa, EZDrummer 3 to BFD3, Get Good Drums, whatever, it doesn't matter. This universal language enables this kind of mapping for any imaginable scenario. So, till next time, if something's not clear, then just say so in the comments.